Rain fell hard, splattered onto the sidewalk, struck the cement, washed it clean. Sitting on a bench in an old gray sweatshirt was a thoroughly unremarkable man. Not too tall or too short. His clothes were not particularly clean or particularly dirty. His countenance was plain, bordering on drab. His sweatshirt was as wet as a washcloth, yet cleaning was not in its imminent future. Water dripped down through his clothes, piling into his boots. On this bleak of bleak days, there was something eye-catching about the lone figure on the bench, a life form glued impenetrably to wet wood. In the town of Orfport, this was a usual figure. He sat, read, and biked. Few people knew his name. He was someone who everyone ignored, but nearly all of the inhabitants of Orfport could recall him. They didn't know where he lived or if he worked, if he had ever been normal. However, there were a fair share of small-town rumors. He was a soldier who went insane, said Linda as she leaned on our garden fence. Jack recalled, I heard something fell on his head, a tortoise. He was senile. The inhabitants gathered in the Slippery Seal coffee shop for optimal gossip. The tall, thin barista seemed perpetually confused at the declining rates of Orfport jugglers. The barista's name was Throw. Throw and his partner Catherine owned the Slippery Seal. They had their own story about the not particularly unusual weirdo. He used to be one of the great jugglers. He kept so much in the air. Wives, mistresses, jobs, gardening duty, children, and frying pans. Of course, one day, failure came knocking on his mistress's door, and it all came crashing down. I've been trying to get him to come back to juggling club ever since. Eventually, the figure stood up from the bench. He slowly ambled to his bike, propped against a telephone pole. With a creaking of the knees and a soft moan, he began to pedal. Man, that bench was cold. Time to warm up with a bike ride, I thought. My clothes provided a wet woolen warmth. This must be what wet sheep smelled like. However, sheep probably smelled better than I at that moment. I hadn't been well for 8 years, could barely remember the feeling of a great rumbling belly laugh, the kind that made your whole body sore. I hadn't even talked extensively with my closest friends for 4 of those years. Occasionally they saw me on the street, but I usually succeeded in escaping down some side alley. If I saw them first, I always tried to hide. It's challenging to hide from a specific person on a public street. You don't want the people who you don't know to think you're the kind of person that hides from the people who you do know. I quickly learned to carry around a newspaper or a book. I hate reading. They were just tools used to avoid people in a small town. Everyone knew me at first glance, but if I pretended to read or hid my head in the hood of my sweatshirt, they seldom bothered me. On the rare instance when my cowardice was thwarted and someone began to talk, I had many ready excuses. My shoes are ready at the cobbler's. There's a deer in my cabin. Mustn't burn the bagels. Time to go sleep with my therapist. I found that strange excuses were met with lengthy pauses, ensuring me plenty of time to hurry away. Plus, they helped me spread rumors about me losing my mind, and sane people don't like to talk to crazy people. Yet even in my current cowardly state, I loved to ride my bicycle. I had always enjoyed bicycling. When you're walking and see an acquaintance, there's an unspoken obligation to stop and talk, but on a bike, it's perfectly acceptable to say a curt hello and keep on pedaling, as though braking were too arduous a task to be employed for quick chats. On a bicycle, I could coast along for many miles, watching the world go by, without having to interact with it. As I continued out of town, I began to hear a soft squeaking sound behind me. I turned around in my saddle to see what was causing it. There was a little girl riding a magenta bicycle with blue highlights. She was wearing bright blue pants, a green suede skirt, and a gold jacket with a large flower embroidered on the left shoulder. On her feet were shiny, wet red boots, and from under her helmet, bushy red hair flooded out. Squinting my eyes, I could see she was grinning, leaving a gap where her front teeth should be. I could hear the sound of a child's voice humming. How strange it is that this child is cycling out of town by herself in a rainstorm. I thought about slowing down to see if she was all right. I decided against it. I would probably spook her. I often had that effect on children. So I turned around, stared down at the trail, and went back to feeling sorry for myself. 30 minutes of somber bicycling later, I could still hear the squeaking sound. I decided to stop and wait. The girl slowed down beside me. "Hello, how are you doing today?" she asked. "All right," I answered. Before I had a chance to ask her what she was doing so far out of town, she began to speak. It was as though I had blown a linguistic dam from her palate. She launched into a story about how strange it was seeing me out bicycling. I didn't know old men biked. I thought they just sat in the coffee shop reading the newspaper and complaining about the woes of the world. I answered with, "I'm so somber the coffee shop newspaper readers don't want to talk to me." "What does somber mean?" she asked. "Well, first tell me your name." I hate when adults answer my questions with another question. "Sometimes that's the best answer." She let out a sigh. "My name's Roxanne." "Now what does somber mean?" she nearly screamed. Somber comes from two Latin words, sub and umbra. Please just tell me what it means. Don't worry, I'm getting there. Sub means under, and umbra means shade. Somber means under something that restricts the light. My depression restricts the light of the world. Roxanne seems saddened by this. "Why are you depressed? Orfport is so wonderful, especially this time of year. It's spring. The trees and bushes are creating their buds and leaves. I saw a baby deer the other day. It was running around a meadow, jumping into the air." Plus, she waved her whole arm over her head. "The rains make everything smell so good." I looked away from Roxanne's young face and piercing green eyes. Well, I guess when you get old, life just goes on happening. You stop smelling the flowers or seeing the madrona trees shimmer in the spring rain. Roxanne glared at me with determination, as if she was willing me to see that fawn playing in the meadow. Her eyes hurt me. They pierced through all the bullshit in my life. Adults are always telling me life happens. My uncle said, "You don't always get what you want." He lives in a mansion. My mom said, "When you grow up, you have to wait in lines, pay taxes, have a job, provide for your family." She shifted her gaze from me to the immense mountains rising out of foggy valleys. I can understand that adults have more responsibilities than little girls like me, but they seem to have completely forgotten how to have fun. I have way more fun than my parents. Even when they do have free time, they just scream at their phones. They're furious at some pretend friend they have called Drivel Dat app. I asked why they don't have a nice pretend friends, but they didn't understand. They're only happy when they drink these horrible smelling fruit juices. Plus, they don't allow me to try the fruit juices. If they did offer me a taste, I would probably say no, but still. Roxanne had hit a nerve in my mind. I let out a chuckle, which slowly grew into a great loud laugh. Adult responsibilities must seem so strange to a child. I was still somber. I'd lost everything. But Roxanne had kindled a flame in all that darkness. It was beginning to shine. Then with a wave, Roxanne said, "Time to go home for supper. See you around Orfport, old man." "See you later, Roxanne." She turned down a side trail and the forest swallowed her up. Later that evening, I pedaled toward a high-ceilinged building on the edge of town. I leaned my bike onto a bench, walked up the front steps. I could hear the sporadic thumping of clubs falling onto the floor. I opened the door and walked inside.